Salams, this is People's Dispatch and you're watching the Daily Roundup, our selection of some of the top news stories from around the world. Let's take a look at today's headlines. Leading progressive figures testify at the third Belmarsh Tribunal in Washington, D.C. In Israel, the battle for power between the legislative and the judiciary intensifies. And India's top wrestlers protest alleged sexual harassment and misgovernance by the sports ruling body. First up, on Friday, the 20th of January, progressive groups in the United States hosted the third Belmarsh Tribunal at the capital, Washington, D.C. The D.C. version of the tribunal was held at the National Press Club, close to the U.S. Capitol, which houses the federal government. The club was where Assange first screened Collateral Murder over a decade ago. The film was 39 minutes of unedited, leaked footage from a gun cam that showed US military crews attacking Al Amin Al Thania, a suburb of Baghdad, and killing 12 civilians. It was the first of hundreds of thousands of leaked military documents, as well as diplomatic cables published by major outlets detailing American actions, including alleged war crimes in both Iraq and Afghanistan. The tribunal was formed back in October 21 and named after the high-security prison near London, where Assange has been held since 2019. He spent most of this time under judicial remand, awaiting the conclusion of an extradition trial. The two previous tribunals were held in London and New York in October 21 and Feb 22. The twofold purpose of these tribunals, of course, has been to both expose and scrutinize US war crimes, as well as to advocate for Assange's release. On Friday, members of the tribunal called out the hypocrisy of the Joe Biden administration for, on the one hand, demanding the release of journalists detained around the world, while the US president continues to seek the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange from Britain to face American espionage charges. Assange is the first publisher to be charged under the US Espionage Act, and there are very real fears that he will not receive a fair trial in the US. A conviction, of course, would lead to massive ramifications on journalists and publishers around the world. The fears of not receiving a fair trial were reiterated by the likes of former CIA employee Jeffrey Sterling, who was imprisoned under the same act, and said it was virtually impossible to defend against the charges. The tribunal heard that the charges against Assange were an ongoing attack on press freedom because the founder was not a spy but a journalist and publisher who is protected under free speech laws. The tribunal co-chairperson, academic Srećko Horvat, quoted Biden from his 2020 presidential campaign, where he called for the release of imprisoned journalists across the world, while quoting Thomas Jefferson, who said that our liberty, and I quote here, depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost, end quote. Horvat, and I quote him now, said President Biden is normally advocating freedom of the press, but at the same time continuing the persecution of Julian Assange. Every country has secrecy laws, he continues. Some countries have draconian secrecy laws. If those countries tried to extradite New York Times reporters and publishers to those countries for publishing their secrets, we would cry foul, and rightly so. Does this administration want to be the first to establish the global precedent that countries can demand the extradition of foreign reporters and publishers for violating their own laws? End quote. Assange faces 18 charges over WikiLeaks' publication of classified documents, which were largely the result of a leak by former US Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning. The tribunal also heard that the accuracy of the information published by WikiLeaks, including evidence of purported war crimes and human rights abuses, was not at all in question. Assange's father, John Shipton, condemned his son's ceaseless, malicious abuse, including the conditions in which he is being held in Belmarsh. He said the UK's handling of the case was an embarrassment and damaged the country's claim to stand for free speech and the rule of law. Former UK Labour Party leader and UK MP Jeremy Corbyn concluded, I quote again, if Julian Assange ends up in a maximum security prison in the United States for the rest of his life, every other journalist around the world will think, should I really report this information I've been given? Should I really speak out about this denial of human rights or miscarriage of justice in any country? Next up, Israel's Attorney General has told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu he must fire a key cabinet ally, the Shas party leader Aryeh Deri. This is according to a letter made public following a Supreme Court ruling that disqualified Deri from serving as a government minister and was made public on the 19th of January. Deri is a long-time Netanyahu ally and has support in the Knesset that could destabilize the precarious coalition currently governing Israel. It is not clear whether Netanyahu will follow through on the court's instructions, written by Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara. It's also likely to exacerbate a dispute that is ongoing over the power of the judicial system and the government's bid to overhaul it. Israel's Supreme Court ruled that Mr. Deri, who leads the government's third largest party, cannot serve as a cabinet minister because of a tax fraud conviction. Deri currently serves as both Interior and Health Minister. Netanyahu's ultra-nationalist and ultra-orthodox government, considered by many as the most right-wing in Israeli history, has made overhauling the country's judiciary a centerpiece of its agenda. It says a power imbalance has given judges and government legal advisors too much sway over lawmaking and governance. The government also wants to weaken the Supreme Court, making it difficult for it to overturn laws it deems unconstitutional. If it does somehow manage to overturn these laws, Parliament could overrule the court's decision with 61 of the 120 votes in Parliament. It has also proposed giving the government more control over how judges are chosen, as well as limiting the independence of government legal advisors and allowing lawmakers to ignore their counsel. Critics say the plans will, of course, upend Israel's system of checks and balances, granting the government overwhelming power and stripping it of all judicial oversight. Fierce criticism has emerged against the plan from top legal officials, former lawmakers, and government ministers as well as the country's booming tech sector. Tens of thousands of Israelis protested the plan last week, and another round of protests is expected over the weekend as well. And finally, the Wrestling Federation of India President Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh has been asked to step aside by the country's sports minister Anurag Thakur while an investigation into sexual harassment allegations against him is continuing. Singh has been accused of misconduct by members of the national team, including most notably three-time Commonwealth Games gold medalist Vinesh Fogart, who promises to release the names of those who are the victims to investigators. Pressures from the protesting wrestlers led to the Indian Olympic Association forming a 7-person committee to look into the allegations. The committee includes Indian women's boxing legend Mary Kom as well as archer Dola Banerjee. Thakur's announcement means that an oversight committee will be formed to investigate on behalf of the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sport, which looks after sport in the country. It remains to be seen, of course, how the World Wrestling Body as well as the International Olympic Committee will react to this action on the government's part. Both the IOA as well as the All India Football Federation have recently been banned by their respective world bodies for government interference. As a result of the action taken by the government, the wrestlers ended their protest, which was held in New Delhi's Jantar Mantar. It must be noted that the protesting wrestlers are very close to the establishment, with many of them using both their popularity as well as their social media presence to promote the BJP government's agendas and programs. Wrestling Federation of India General Secretary V.N. Prasood wrote back to the Sports Ministry rejecting the accusations against the body's president. I quote from his reply, "Any aggrieved person or wrestler may approach the said committee for its grievances," that is of course the WFI Sexual Harassment Committee, "if any, which committee is bound to inquire as per law. However, no such complaint of any nature has been aired by the protesters or the wrestlers and has been received so far. Hence, any such media reports without any specific complaint received can never be taken note of by the WFI Sexual Harassment Committee, nor can such allegations be affirmed or confirmed." He went on to say that these charges are motivated, biased, unfounded, untrue and false bald allegations solely with a view to harm the president, the WFI or the coaches of the WFI. Further developments on this story are expected in the coming week. Wrestling is a popular mass sport in India, with both its traditional as well as Olympic formats being held widely and enjoyed by many across the country. That's a wrap for this episode of the Daily Roundup. For more details on these stories, we invite you as always to head to our website peoplesdispatch.org, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.